Picture this, it's 1927. A quiet suburban street hums with the buzz of Model T engines. Children in wool coats rush out the front doors of modest clapboard houses, clutching metal lunch pails. Inside? Not peanut butter and jelly. Not chips. But something far more curious: egg and olive sandwiches, cold macaroni salad, prune and nut bread, and tomato aspic tucked in wax paper. Forgotten flavors. Forgotten stories. And a forgotten chapter of American food history. These weren't extravagant dishes, nor the scraps of poverty. These were the proud, peculiar, and practical meals of America's rising middle class. Housewives balancing thrift and nutrition. Fathers working the railroads, clerks, or early office jobs. And kids who traded slices of date loaf for a taste of creamed peas in tart shells. In today's episode, we're opening up the lunchboxes of a bygone era, peering into the daily lives of 1920s suburban families and uncovering the recipes that defined a generation of American eaters. They may sound strange now, but every dish holds a story of class, culture, and survival between two world wars. So, what did lunch taste like in a time before supermarkets, fast food, or plastic wrap? Stay with me, because what you're about to hear might just make you want to bring one of these forgotten meals back to life. Let's begin with something bold, something that would have made a 1920s school kid the talk of the lunch bench: deviled tongue sandwiches. Now, don't let the name scare you. In the 1920s, beef tongue wasn't taboo, it was practical. It was affordable, packed with protein, and a mark of smart, economical cooking. For middle-class families trying to stretch their dollars in post-war suburbia, tongue was both a delicacy and a duty. To make it, housewives would start with a slow-braised beef tongue, simmered in onions, bay leaves, and peppercorns until fork tender. Then came the twist, finely chopped and mixed with spicy mustard, paprika, a hint of horseradish, chopped pickles, and just enough mayonnaise to bind. This fiery, creamy spread was what gave it the deviled name: spicy, punchy, unapologetic. Sliced thin and slathered onto rye or Pullman bread, sometimes buttered, sometimes toasted, these sandwiches carried a savory, peppery richness that stood out in a world before processed lunch meats and plastic cheese slices. Wrapped in wax paper and tucked beside an apple or a few celery sticks, it was a statement. This lunch wasn't bland. It was brave. And while the idea of eating tongue may turn heads today, for suburban families of the 1920s, it was a way to honor every part of the animal. No waste, no shame. This wasn't just lunch, it was a lesson in thrift, flavor, and food courage. Deviled tongue sandwiches may not make the menu at your local deli today, but back then, they were a badge of culinary confidence, tangy, bold, and totally unforgettable. Stick around, because up next, we're diving into a loaf that blended pimento cheese and crushed nuts. Proof that 1920s lunchboxes weren't just strange, they were sophisticated. Next up is a loaf that might sound unusual today, but in the 1920s, it was the very definition of elegance between slices of bread: pimento cheese and nut loaf. This wasn't the processed orange stuff we squeeze out of plastic tubs today. No, this was homemade pimento cheese, sharply grated cheddar blended with butter, chopped pimentos, and a touch of vinegar or Worcestershire for zing. Soft, creamy. But then came the twist: finely chopped walnuts or pecans folded right in. For the suburban housewife of the 1920s, this loaf was a showstopper. It didn't just feed the family, it impressed guests at garden luncheons or church socials. And when sliced and tucked into a child's lunchbox, it said one thing: our home knows refinement. The loaf itself was molded in a tin, chilled overnight, and sliced cold the next morning, each piece firm, colorful, and slightly sweet from the nuts. It was often layered between thin bread slices, crusts trimmed, cut diagonally. No mayo. No meat. Just creamy cheese, bright pimentos, and that unexpected crunch from the nuts. At a time when factory-made lunch meat was still a novelty and vegetarian meals were a mark of sophistication, this sandwich stood out. It offered nourishment, but also a certain charm, one that reflected changing tastes and rising aspirations of America's growing middle class. Today, it might raise eyebrows, but back then, it raised expectations. It was a sandwich with texture, color, and confidence. Coming up next, a sandwich filling that's almost vanished from American kitchens, but once held its place in nearly every lunchbox along the Eastern rail lines. Stay tuned. There was a time when a sandwich didn't need meat to be mighty. Enter the olive and egg salad sandwich, a lunchtime staple that once graced the lunchboxes of countless suburban families in the 1920s. This was more than a humble mix, it was kitchen wisdom in action. Hard-boiled eggs, mashed until silky. Green olives, chopped finely to release their sharp, briny bite. A few slivers of celery for crunch, and just enough mustard or vinegar to give the whole thing a little backbone. Creamy, salty, textured, each ingredient playing its part without waste or excess. For middle-class homemakers, this was smart food. Eggs were affordable. Olives, once considered exotic, were now more widely available thanks to improved canning and rail distribution. This sandwich reflected changing times, a blend of old-world simplicity and new-world accessibility. Spread thick on white sandwich bread, or sometimes dark rye for a bit more bite, it was often wrapped in wax paper, tucked beside a piece of fruit or a few crackers. No frills, just honest flavor. To a child, it was familiar. To a parent, it was balanced and budget-friendly. And to the times, it was perfectly modern. Today, you rarely see it. But in the 1920s, this sandwich was a quiet lunchtime hero. Modest, yes, but unforgettable in the right hands. And next, we dig into a spread so bright and sweet, it was practically a dessert disguised as lunch. Now imagine opening your lunchbox in 1927 and finding something that looked like dessert, but was served as a sandwich. Sweet, nutty, and creamy all in one bite. This was date and nut bread with cream cheese filling, and yes, it was a thing. This wasn't an indulgence, it was smart cooking. Dates were a common pantry item, shelf-stable and packed with natural sugar. Nuts, usually walnuts, added texture and protein. Together, they were baked into a moist, dark, quick bread that needed no yeast, no rising, and very little fuss. The loaf was cooled, then sliced into thin, sturdy slabs. Between them, a generous layer of cream cheese, sometimes whipped with a touch of honey or orange zest, depending on the home cook's flair. The result was a soft, dense sandwich with just the right balance of richness and tang. Mothers loved it because it kept well, filled hungry kids, and felt like a treat. Children loved it because it was sweet, creamy, and different from the usual meat or egg fillings. In women's clubs and tea rooms, this very same loaf would often be sliced thinner and served as delicate finger sandwiches. In a decade obsessed with modern appliances and fast food innovation, this sandwich was a beautiful contradiction, old-fashioned in ingredients, modern in form. A bit of comfort in a rapidly changing world. Today it's all but vanished. But back then, date and nut bread with cream cheese was a quiet symbol of practicality wrapped in something that felt just a little luxurious. And next, we peel back the layers of a sandwich made entirely from leftovers, yet good enough to earn its place at the dinner table and in the schoolyard. In the 1920s, innovation didn't just happen in factories and cities. It happened in kitchens too, and sometimes, it took the form of gelatin. One of the most curious lunchbox entries of the era? Jellied chicken salad. Yes, you heard that right. Chicken and gelatin. And while that may sound off-putting to modern tastes, in its time, it was nothing short of cutting edge. This recipe was born at the crossroads of thrift and modernity. Leftover boiled or roasted chicken was chopped and folded into a mixture of chopped celery, pimentos, and sometimes hard-boiled egg. Then came the defining feature, clear, unflavored gelatin, dissolved, cooled, and poured over the mixture to set it into a firm, sliceable mold. Once chilled, the result was a cold, savory loaf that could be sliced like meat. Sandwich it between slices of white bread, perhaps with a thin spread of mayonnaise or mustard, and you had a tidy, nutritious, and surprisingly elegant meal. For housewives of the middle class, this dish was a marvel. It made leftovers stretch further, didn't require reheating, and looked impressively modern. It reflected the era's fascination with cleanliness, efficiency, and the rise of refrigeration. In lunchboxes, it stood out, not because it was fancy, but because it was forward-thinking. This was food as science, food as fashion. Today, it may be a relic. But back then, jelly chicken salad was a little glimpse into the future, where presentation met practicality, and yesterday's roast became tomorrow's lunch. Up next, a spread made with nothing but beans, yet so smooth and satisfying, it earned its place beside ham and chicken. In the 1920s, lunch wasn't just about what you packed, it was about how well you made do with what you had. And nothing captured that spirit better than cabbage slaw and bacon biscuit wraps. This wasn't a wrap as we think of it today, no tortillas or sandwich bread. Instead, it began with warm, flaky buttermilk biscuits, homemade, hearty, and ready to be split open like sandwich rolls. Inside, a tangy cabbage slaw, shredded by hand, tossed with vinegar, sugar, and a touch of mustard seed. The crunch of the cabbage gave it life, while the dressing added brightness and bite. Then came the bacon, cooked crisp and crumbled, or laid in strips depending on the family's means. Together, the mixture was layered into the biscuit, wrapped tightly in wax paper, and tucked into a lunchbox still warm from the morning oven. Why this combination? Because cabbage was cheap, bacon went a long way, and biscuits were a staple in nearly every kitchen. But combined, they created something more, something that felt indulgent without actually being so. This was Depression-era thinking before the Depression officially began. Stretch the meat, highlight the vegetables, and let texture and flavor do the heavy lifting. Children opened their lunch pails to find not just a meal, but a small, thoughtful creation. Crispy, creamy, salty, warm. It satisfied hunger, but also pride. It's all but forgotten now. But back then, cabbage and bacon tucked inside a biscuit wasn't odd, it was inspired. Next up, a dainty little sandwich made with mashed peas, served cold, green, and shockingly loved. In the 1920s, not every sandwich needed to be savory, or even fully cooked. Sometimes it was about color, texture, and thrift. That's where the pickled beet and cottage cheese sandwich comes in. To the modern eye, it might seem like an odd pairing. But back then, this sandwich was praised in women's magazines and homemaker columns for being refreshing, affordable, and above all, nutritious. The ingredients were simple. Pickled beets, sliced thin, their brilliant magenta colors standing out like stained glass. And cottage cheese, mild, creamy, and full of protein. Together, they created a contrast of flavors and textures, tangy and soft, earthy and bright. Most families used homemade bread for this, dense, slightly sweet, and able to hold the moisture of the beets without falling apart. The sandwich was often layered carefully, sometimes with a few lettuce leaves to absorb any extra brine. Why this odd pairing? It was efficient. Beets kept well in jars. Cottage cheese could be made at home from leftover milk. And the result? A filling lunch with just the right amount of elegance. Middle-class mothers favored it for its cost-effectiveness. And children, well, they remembered it for the color. That striking beet red often bled into the bread, giving each bite a watercolor look. To some, that was magic. It's vanished from most tables now. But in 1920s suburbia, it was common, creative, frugal, and full of flavor. Up next, a sandwich spread that came straight from the farm, made with mashed peas and sweet onions, packed in wax paper like a little green gift. Jell-O wasn't just for dessert in the 1920s. In fact, it was a culinary revolution. And one of its strangest, but most respected, creations was tomato aspic, often served cold, with a bundle of celery sticks. It sounds bizarre today. But back then, it was the height of refinement. Tomato aspic was made by combining seasoned tomato juice, sometimes with a dash of Worcestershire or vinegar, with unflavored gelatin. It was strained until smooth, gently heated, and then poured into molds to set. Once chilled, the aspic became a gleaming, firm jelly, deep red, translucent, and savory. Celery sticks were arranged beside it, chilled and crisp, ready to be dipped or simply crunched between bites. This wasn't just about flavor, it was about presentation. Tomato aspic was elegant, modern, and, most importantly, safe. The rise of refrigeration meant gelatin salads could be made at home without fear, and they held up beautifully in a lunchbox. For the middle-class homemaker, tomato aspic was a chance to serve something that looked upscale but cost very little. Leftover tomato juice and a few cents worth of gelatin became a centerpiece. Add a side of celery, and you had crunch, hydration, and health, all in one dish. This lunch was cool, clean, and proudly practical. It didn't need meat or bread to make a statement. It was 1920s innovation on a plate. You won't find it in modern lunchboxes, but in its time, tomato aspic with celery was a sign that the future had arrived, and it was molded. Next, we rediscover a forgotten sandwich made with peas and onions, green, humble, and unexpectedly beloved. Before frozen meals and drive-thrus, the American lunchbox was a place of creativity and resilience. And few recipes embodied that more than ham and rice croquettes. These weren't just leftovers. They were leftovers reborn. Housewives in the 1920s didn't waste a thing. Bits of yesterday's baked ham and cooled white rice were chopped and stirred together, bound with a little egg, and seasoned with mustard, onion, and a hint of pepper. Rolled into compact ovals or balls, these croquettes were then dipped in breadcrumbs and pan-fried until golden and crisp on the outside, warm and tender inside. They were the perfect lunchbox food, sturdy, flavorful, and easy to pack. Wrapped in wax paper, they held up beautifully until midday, whether eaten cold or at room temperature. A croquette didn't just fill you, it satisfied. To a middle-class family in the 1920s, this was smart cooking. Ham added flavor without needing much, and rice made the meal stretch. It was economical but not bland, crispy, savory, and just indulgent enough to feel special. Some families served them with a dollop of mustard or a spoonful of leftover gravy on the side. Others paired them with sliced pickles or stewed fruit. But no matter how they were served, croquettes symbolized resourcefulness turned delicious. Today, we might overlook a recipe like this. But back then, it was a lunchbox triumph. A bite-sized promise that nothing went to waste and everything had a second chance. Next, we step into the sweet side again, with a creamy fruit sandwich spread that was once all the rage in ladies' luncheons and school lunches alike. It looked like a chicken leg. It was shaped like a chicken leg. But there wasn't a shred of chicken in it. Welcome to the clever world of the 1920s lunchbox, and one of its most creative inventions, the mock chicken leg, also called city chicken. In a time when chicken was expensive and considered a Sunday-only luxury, home cooks turned to more affordable meats, usually pork or veal. These were cubed, skewered on sticks, seasoned, then breaded and pan-fried until golden brown. The final touch? A slow bake to make the outside crisp and the inside tender. Served hot the night before and cold the next day, city chicken was perfect for lunchboxes. It looked impressive, tasted like something far fancier, and was easy to pack. Wrapped in wax paper or foil, it was a sturdy, finger-friendly meal on the go. The name, city chicken, wasn't just clever, it was defiant. Urban families without access to farms couldn't afford real chicken. So they made their own version, proudly rebranded, and just as satisfying. It was meat on a stick, dressed up for the imagination. In schoolyards and factory lunchrooms, these mock drumsticks were both filling and fun. Some even dipped them in mustard or packed them alongside pickled vegetables. It was lunch with a story and with pride. Today, city chicken is a regional relic. But in its time, it was a brilliant solution to a growing problem: how to eat well when real chicken was out of reach. Next, we discover a sandwich spread made entirely from pantry staples, creamy, sweet, and unexpectedly luxurious. Imagine opening your lunchbox and finding not a sandwich, but a delicate little tart, golden and flaky, filled to the brim with creamy peas and carrots. In the 1920s, this wasn't just lunch. It was care, and quiet elegance. Creamed vegetables were a staple in American kitchens, soft, comforting, and a clever way to use garden produce. But in middle-class homes, presentation mattered. That's where the tart shell came in. Homemade or store-bought, tart shells were baked until crisp and light. Inside, a warm mixture of peas and carrots simmered in a white sauce, made with butter, flour, milk, and just a touch of nutmeg or parsley for flavor. Once cooled, the sauce thickened just enough to hold its shape. Spoon it into the tart shells, let them chill overnight, and you had a handheld lunch that looked like it came from a hotel tray, not a kitchen table. For mothers packing lunch, this was a statement, proof that even vegetables could be dressed up. These little tarts were both nutritious and beautiful. No meat, yet no one complained. They were often paired with fruit, a cookie, or a bottle of cold milk. And in a sea of plain sandwiches, they stood out. Quietly refined. Undeniably thoughtful. Today, creamed vegetables may feel old-fashioned. But in 1920s suburbia, they were transformed, lifted by pastry, preserved in wax paper, and carried proudly to school or work. Coming up next, the surprising popularity of mashed peas on bread, and how a humble green vegetable made its way into the American Lunchbox Hall of Fame. In the world of 1920s lunchboxes, not every meal was rich, and not every sandwich needed meat. Sometimes, a simple vegetable, mashed just right, could become the star. Enter mashed green pea and onion tea sandwiches. Tea sandwiches weren't just for social events. Middle-class families borrowed the style, dainty, crustless, and layered with spreads that were easy to make and inexpensive to stretch. This version used one of the most humble ingredients in the pantry, canned or fresh green peas. Mashed gently, then blended with finely chopped onion, salt, and a bit of butter or mayonnaise. Some families even added a pinch of mint or lemon juice for brightness. The spread was smooth but chunky, vibrant in color, unexpected in flavor. Served between slices of soft white or wheat bread, the crusts removed and the edges pressed, these sandwiches were neat, tidy, and surprisingly refreshing. Peas were cheap, packed with nutrition, and easy to grow. Onions kept well and added punch. Together, they made a smart, satisfying meal, especially when meat was scarce or saved for dinner. For school children and office workers alike, these sandwiches were light but filling. Packed in wax paper with an apple or slice of cake, they brought a touch of grace to an ordinary day. Today, mashed peas might seem like an odd choice. But in 1920s kitchens, they were a symbol of creativity, of how far a simple garden harvest could go. Next, we move into something sweet again, soft date and nut bread filled with a creamy surprise in the middle. Before pasta salads filled deli cases, cold macaroni and tomato salad was already a staple in the 1920s American lunchbox, quietly tucked between a folded napkin and a hard-boiled egg. It began with macaroni, elbow-shaped, soft but not mushy, boiled just right. Mixed into it were ripe tomatoes, diced fine and juicy, their acid bite balanced by the creamy dressing that tied it all together. That dressing? Simple. Often just a mixture of mayonnaise, a dash of mustard powder, vinegar, salt, and pepper. Sometimes a pinch of sugar, sometimes a splash of pickle brine, depending on the housewife's taste or what she had on hand. The salad was chilled overnight in an icebox. That was key. Cold pasta allowed the flavors to meld, the sharpness of tomato, the richness of mayo, the zing of seasoning. For middle-class families, this salad was genius. It used pantry staples. It was meatless but filling. It packed well in tins or jars, and with a small fork and a cloth napkin, it could be eaten just about anywhere. And it wasn't just for kids. Workers, teachers, and even homemakers on errands took it along. Sometimes garnished with chopped celery, green peppers, or even a hard-boiled egg on top, it brought color and comfort to a midday break. Today, it might look plain beside modern pasta salads. But in the 1920s, it was fresh, practical, and proudly homemade. Coming next, a chilled gelatin creation made not with fruit, but with chicken. And it once graced nearly every picnic table across suburban America. In the 1920s, simplicity didn't mean sacrifice. Especially when it came to the working-class lunchbox. One bite of a thick, golden slice of potato and onion pie, and you'd taste survival turned savory. This dish was a staple across American kitchens, born from the need to stretch what little you had. Potatoes were cheap, onions were flavorful, and together, they made something deeply comforting. The pie began with thinly sliced potatoes and sweet onions, layered into a buttery crust, often homemade with lard or leftover drippings. Salt, pepper, maybe a hint of thyme or a spoonful of cream added depth. Some families tossed in cheese, if they had it. Most didn't. Once assembled, it was baked until the top turned golden and the bottom crust crisped up, holding everything together in slices firm enough to pack and eat by hand. For families without meat, this pie delivered warmth and weight. It filled the belly and held up well in a lunch pail. Cold or room temperature, it was delicious. Wrapped in wax paper and tucked beside a boiled egg or a piece of fruit, it was more than just a meal, it was a promise that things would be okay. Some regions even added a second crust on top, turning it into a full pie. Others baked it open-faced, like a tart. Either way, it fed many for pennies. In a time when every slice mattered, potato and onion pie was practical, resourceful, and proudly made from scratch. Next up, a sandwich made with bright pink pickled beets and cool cottage cheese, one of the most unusual yet beloved combos of the decade. It was bright. It was bold. And in the 1920s, it was completely normal to open your lunch and find a sandwich dyed pink. This is the story of the pickled beet and cottage cheese sandwich, a strange-sounding dish with surprisingly loyal fans. Beets were a favorite in Depression-era kitchens. Easy to grow, long-lasting, and perfect for pickling. Their tangy sweetness paired beautifully with something creamy, and that's where cottage cheese came in. This sandwich started with thick slices of homemade bread, white, rye, or wheat. A generous layer of cottage cheese was spread on one side, soft and cool. On the other, pickled beets, thinly sliced, glistening, sometimes chopped fine to avoid spills. When pressed together, the juice from the beets soaked gently into the bread, tinting it a light magenta and giving the sandwich a sweet-sour edge. For families trying to balance nutrition with budget, this combo was ideal. Beets offered vitamins and color. Cottage cheese gave protein and richness. Together, they made a filling, refreshing sandwich, especially on warmer days. These sandwiches were often wrapped in wax paper and packed alongside a piece of fruit or a molasses cookie. Some even added shredded lettuce or a pinch of horseradish for a kick. Today, the idea might raise eyebrows. But back then, it was creative cooking at its best, using what was on hand to build something unusual, tasty, and deeply satisfying. Next, we move to a dish once seen on church supper tables and garden parties alike: cool, firm, and molded into shape, tomato aspic with celery sticks. They sizzled in the skillet before sunrise, golden, crisp, and packed with flavor. Canned salmon patties were the unsung hero of the 1920s lunchbox, and when topped with a spoonful of pickle relish, they became something far more memorable. In a time when fresh fish was a luxury and meat prices were rising fast, canned salmon offered middle-class families a rare treat: real protein, affordable, and shelf-stable. One tin stretched far, especially when mixed with breadcrumbs, egg, chopped onion, and a touch of milk. Formed into small patties and fried until crisp, these cakes were flavorful and hearty. The outer crunch gave way to a tender, savory center with just the right hint of the sea. But the magic was in the contrast. Served cold the next day, each patty was topped with a dollop of sweet pickle relish. That tangy sweet finish balanced the richness of the fish and added brightness to every bite. Packed to a wax paper wrap, these salmon patties could be eaten with a fork or by hand. Sometimes paired with hard-boiled eggs, carrot sticks, or a simple vinegar slaw, they turned an ordinary lunch into something deeply satisfying. In lunchrooms, factory break rooms, and schoolyards, these patties became a quiet symbol of clever cooking. How pantry staples could be transformed into a meal that tasted like it came from a diner. Today, canned salmon might feel like an afterthought. But in 1920s kitchens, it was gold in a can, turned into something delicious with just a few humble hands. Next, we rediscover a dish both dainty and hearty: the rice and ham croquette, crispy on the outside, creamy on the inside. We end today's journey with something deceptively simple, but rich with flavor, memory, and care. Sour cream and chive deviled eggs, a creamy, tangy twist on a timeless staple, tucked into wax paper parcels or porcelain dishes with just as much pride as any roast or pie. In 1920s suburban kitchens, deviled eggs weren't just for parties. They made elegant, mess-free lunchbox companions, bite-sized, satisfying, and full of character. This variation skipped the expected mayonnaise. Instead, home cooks blended sour cream with the egg yolks, added chopped fresh chives from the garden, a hint of mustard, a shake of salt, and sometimes a dash of white pepper or paprika for flair. Each half was spooned or piped with the rich, velvety filling. The sour cream brought tang, the chives offered brightness. And when chilled overnight, the flavors deepened into something quietly addictive. Wrapped gently in paper or packed into a small tin, these eggs made their way into lunch pails across towns and cities, accompanied by crackers, sliced apples, or even a small square of gingerbread. They were humble, they were elegant, and they were made with love, often from hens kept in the backyard. With sour cream and chive deviled eggs, we close this chapter on forgotten lunchbox recipes, not just meals, but edible time capsules from an America learning how to stretch, save, and savor. If these stories stirred a memory or a little hunger, there's more to come. Forgotten recipes, overlooked ingredients, and the untold flavors of American history are waiting to be rediscovered. So if you haven't yet, hit subscribe. Join us as we bring more lost dishes back to life, one bite and one story at a time. Until next time, pack well, eat slow, and never underestimate the magic of a good sandwich.